Take two. Yeah. Okay, so hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Ghost Countries podcast. As usual, I'm joined by my co-host over in Germany, who's now known as Geist.
Hey guys. Hello guys.
Eventually, we'll get you a little ghost icon as well, I think.
Yeah, I'm just so poorly sitting here with my country ball.
But yeah, so as per usual, we're going to be diving into one of the episodes we covered, as a regular Ghost Country on the channel during this podcast. And today, that is going to be the German Confederation and Arminius, and the role he played in crafting or forming the German Confederation. But I think it would be better for you guys to take start this off.
Yeah. So, it's difficult for saying it's a ghost country because it's actually not a real ghost country, as we said in the episode, but it's like a kind of prototype state which was trying to be formed.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I always found this story very fascinating because it's
You're German.
That was definitely a part of it, but in general, I just like to hear those stories with the Roman Empire and
Mm-hmm.
actually not the things which were successful, but the things which didn't go so well for them, because that makes it more interesting. Because at a certain point, the Romans were just like the juggernaut in Europe. So yeah, it's for me that was very interesting because also for the whole setting as well.
Well, no, and sorry to cut in there, but I was going to say, to your point, this was a major setback for the Roman Empire at the time. There's just no dancing around it. They had plans to expand into, Germania. And when you look at the situation on the ground at the time, there's really no reason they shouldn't have been able to succeed. The German tribes were fractured. There was infighting between them. So for Arminius to do what he did and forge a practical alliance or confederation, this proto-state, the German Confederation, I think it really plays out like some type of epic, historical drama or something.
Yeah, there is actually a Netflix show.
Oh yeah.
Which was produced. It's called Barbarians. Even though it has some flaws, I think generally speaking, it's done pretty well.
Yeah, I would agree.
And for a German series, I must say, German series in general, don't watch them. Most of them are really not good. Even though recently there have been some better ones. But I think that one is pretty good. They speak mostly in Latin.
Yeah, I was going to point that out.
Something that I actually really think is pretty cool. Yeah, but so I like the show, but I think you were not a big fan of it, right?
No. I checked it out, based on your recommendation, and I thought it was good. It goes a little bit into
soap opera.
Yeah, like a soap opera quality. And it's not like I don't like that. I guess sometimes it felt like it was it was dragging out because of that. But overall, no, I would agree. If anyone has an interest in the story of Arminius and the German Confederation, you definitely should check that out because season 1 is out. And I think,
episode.
Yeah. Yeah. And our episode, of course, there's going to be a card. So, click that if you haven't. But no, season 1 was pretty good. And I think they're making season 2, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah. I think so, yeah.
I'm pretty sure there was a to be continued in 2022.
It would make sense because probably they were watching our episode. So they know that there is actually more to come.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But no, I will admit it was really cool to watch that miniseries after having worked on this episode with you, because I will admit I knew some aspects of the story, but this is not an area that I have, particular depth in. And again, I knew of some of the Germanic tribes. I knew of Arminius very loosely, but to put the story together and see how this all came out, it was a really fascinating chapter of history for me too. And I just want to stress it again. Germania, if you looked at the situation on the ground, when you saw what happened in Gaul, Germania shouldn't have been that difficult for the Romans. So it was actually very difficult for the Germans in some ways, but to get together and forge these alliances and make the Confederation. But it's just interesting because you can compare and contrast the two and see, because the Gauls tried putting up resistance too. I mean, they did. There was an attempt to unite and push back against the Romans, right?
And yeah, I mean, it was almost successful.
Yeah.
The interesting part, good that you bring that up, is Gaul and Germania. I mean, there was almost the same time frame. It was a little later, admittedly, but it was during a similar time period. And one of the major reasons why this whole stuff didn't work is because Gaul and Germania were totally different in terms of not geography, but urbanization. That was actually a big factor, because in Germany there was, nothing. There were some tribes, some villages and stuff, but in Gaul at the same time you had big cities already. And that was something that in Germany was not existing. Many of them were like nomad style, and you didn't get into big groups or gathered into big groups, which initially was a big problem and later became a very good situation there, because the Romans could not conquer a city, apply their supply chains, and then just move forward. They tried that, but it was not as easy.
Well, yeah, because in that type of situation, you're looking at more like asymmetrical warfare, in the sense in that it's not like you said, you just capture a major urban center, consolidate control, and then, move your supply lines, consolidate your position. I mean, if there are cities like that, you can do that. But in this situation, like you said, it was quasi-nomadic, small tribes that could just easily, run away and disappear into the forest and then pop out in another place, maybe unexpectedly. And, it was rough terrain and very wooded. So this very much was kind of like, I don't know what you want to give a comparison with, like a modern event, but I guess you could say there's some similarities with like the Vietnam War, in a sense, where it was like your enemy was not, they were fluid in a sense, and they could just blend into the environment and pop out wherever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was kind of comparable.
Yeah.
Oh,
go on. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh no, go on.
No. Yeah. Right now, I'm thinking out of what I wanted to say. No, so you go first.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, I think it's worth talking a little bit about what's lost in this story, because that was something, I mean, I knew, and, dealing with this time period, it makes a lot of sense, but it's still interesting to me to know that there is so much we don't know about for these early Germanic tribes and peoples. I mean, we have some, kind of vague understanding of what their religion may have been, what their societal structure may have been, the economics, the politics between the various tribes and their histories, but it's all very vague. And that even goes to, their encounters with the Romans. I mean, we do have some documents discussing what occurred, but those are almost all from Roman sources. And because of that, there's inherent bias. And even if there wasn't that inherent bias, there's still going to be a ton of information that's, lacking.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because and that is actually, in my opinion, always a very sad thing to see when there is something like this.
Yeah, it's lost history.
Yeah, exactly. There was just no written culture or whatever. So they were not writing down things, at least not in a way that for us nowadays would be easy to see. And that is, like, for example, a big reason why a lot of these things we know from Roman sources, because they were writing things down, which of course makes it difficult to understand it from the point of view of the tribes.
You know what that's kind of similar to, not to cut in again, but I'm sure you've heard the story before, but the Incas and their language system, the quipus, which basically were a series of like different knots and colors on threads and stuff that formed a language essentially. And the Spanish, with their takeover of the region, basically decimated all those who had knowledge of the quipu system. And it was over a period of years, but basically that became a lost language. And there is a ton of information pertaining to the Inca Empire and their early history that is just lost because this language essentially is lost to us.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. I mean, just on a side note, one of my ex-girlfriend's grandma She was from the area, and she actually still spoke Quechua,
Oh, that's
which is
interesting.
like a very, very rare
Yeah.
language nowadays.
Yeah, no, definitely endangered for sure.
Yeah. Or was it her great grandma? I don't remember, but it was definitely like uh, and this is actually really interesting. But yeah, it's correct. Like many of these languages are lost or almost lost.
Yeah.
And for example, going back to Germany or the Germanic. Oh gosh, oh god, I almost want to say
Germania.
Germania, exactly. There were actually quite many differences between the different tribes. For us nowadays, they just appear to be a block that were all pretty similar. But if you at the time told the Cheruscians, "Hey, you are actually the same as the Marcomannis," I think you would have a big problem there.
Oh yeah.
Because not only talking about the deities, many of them had different names in different places, or also they were believing different things what the deity can do or can't, or will do or won't. But also language. I mean, you can see that nowadays. We are a very connected world. But if you go from I don't know, Mississippi to California, they speak totally different.
At least in terms of accents. But no, I do get the
Yeah.
point you're saying, because a lot of these, entities, these countries of today, France, Germany, the various Scandinavian nations, et cetera, you go back, not even that far back in time, like, a few hundred years ago, and there were vast regional differences in terms of language, in terms of perception and identity. And the further back you go, the more, I guess you could say, entrenched these differences became. And, someone from one region that was maybe not that far from another, still, they would consider themselves completely distinct peoples.
Yeah. So yeah, so the whole stuff is actually like, for us nowadays, it's always it appears like a clear story and stuff. And yeah, there were some Germans. I mean, it's true that they were speaking a similar language, but and different, similar cultures. But it's always got to be said, it's similar, not the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you saw that also with religions.
Yeah, no, definitely.
How big conflict there can be if somebody says, "Hey, I think our God wants this," and the other one says, "No, I think our God wants this." How much conflict there can be. So yeah, we should always take this into consideration when talking about those tribes.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Now, I don't want to skip too far ahead in the story, but I think, actually, before we get to this, why don't you talk a little bit about Arminius? Because I think he's a very interesting character. I mean, we don't know everything about him, and that includes his brother, which we know virtually nothing about. But
Yeah.
still, I think this is an interesting story because he was taken as a political hostage, and he lived almost all of his formative years in Rome, being exposed to Roman culture and being thoroughly Romanized. And
Yeah.
it's
Almost
just,
like my story.
yeah, I guess that's kind of true. But no, it's interesting that he was taken from his, parent culture so thoroughly, I guess you could say, indoctrinated, or at least brought up in this foreign culture, and then thrust back into, his homeland, Germania. And it's interesting to see that despite all those years in Rome, he made the switch, and he played a decisive role in what was probably one of the biggest military defeats for Rome.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like very interesting would be to find out the reason why, because we just don't know. I mean,
we have some
as you said before,
ideas, but yeah,
we have some ideas. But also, it's actually funny that we know so much about this story and also so little, because we
Sure.
don't have other sources. For example, what I was describing before, the problem with the sources was you have the name Arminius, but people who have some knowledge in linguistics will know that Arminius is not really a Germanic name.
True. I mean, yeah, that's yeah.
And like also the name Hermann, which later came up, that was actually just coming up some 100 years later.
Mm-mm.
So actually also almost 1,000 years. Yeah, so we don't know what his real name was. Also about his name, his brother, where we actually just have another name. I think it was Flavius, but I'm not 100% sure if that
I'm
was
pretty
correct.
sure that's what it was as well.
Yeah, I mean Flavius is also
It's clearly
Latin,
Roman.
and
Yeah, Latin.
yeah, and it means the blonde. So yeah, we and about him, so we even know less because he didn't make part of this
No.
rebellion.
No, I mean, we know nothing. Like you said, he went to Rome with Arminius, and isn't that about it? I mean, did he die?
Yeah,
Did he? We don't know.
I think we know that he was in the, but I could be wrong here. I think he was in the army of Tiberius.
Oh.
So there, I mean, I don't know if they were in the same. Was it called company? I mean, the same military formation. But I think he also went to Germania. But I could be wrong here.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So this whole story about Arminius is basically a big question mark, except for the fact that there was a rebellion taking place. And there are some smaller instances where we know, for example, that he was in Pannonia, which nowadays would be probably Austria or Hungary.
Yeah, basically that region.
Yeah, like fighting against an insurgent, I think.
Wasn't it the revolt or something? Not the Illyrian revolt, no. Or was it? No.
There was, I think it was called Pannonian Revolt or
Yeah.
something like
No,
this.
I was getting my revolts mixed up in Rome, but yeah, go on.
Yeah, so we know that he was doing this, and also that he was a cavalry commander from the auxiliary forces, which was actually pretty good. But we don't know what changed his mind. I mean, he was, as you said, probably indoctrinated, or I mean, that comes by itself. I think when you grow up at a certain place without contact to your home,
Well,
and I mean, it was not like nowadays. You know, nowadays when you, for example, move from Poland to let's say Ghana, then you are a totally different place. But you know, through phones, or before it was even with telephone, letters and stuff, you could still have some contact to your home. But at that time, that was it. A travel there would take weeks and would be probably not doable for most people.
Oh, and one thing I just want to interject very quickly is you have to consider the context in which Arminius and Flavius were taken. It was as political hostages. They were very clearly taken, as we note in the episode, to be brought up in Roman culture, to be Romanized, whether that meant they just had a career in the military or more than likely for the purpose of installing them as kind of Romanized puppet leaders in Germania at some point.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, that doesn't make the story better.
Yeah.
But they did that with a lot of.
Oh yeah, this was not unique to Germany or Germania.
Yeah.
This occurred throughout the empire, but still, I think that context has to be understood. These people were taken first off as hostages so that the then Germanic leaders, you knew there would be consequences if they acted against Rome. And then secondly, they were to be brought up so that potentially they could be returned to Germania as a type of Romanized elite or something of that nature.
You know, and actually the thing is, Arminius was kind of haunting me for a long time because I mean, so I did my bachelor's degree in Rome. That's why I said I have a similar story.
Oh, true.
Like, yeah. I went from Germany to Rome and then back. But I didn't start a revolution, don't worry. No, but when I was in Rome, I remember that there was a certain time when I was very fascinated by this whole story and did a lot of research. And what actually my goal was to write a book about Arminius. But unfortunately, I never started that.
Eh,
But I think I still have the notes that I took for that purpose. Who knows? Maybe
yeah,
one day.
yeah, you never know. I mean, the channel can be a launch pad for certain things. I mean, no, I mean, we've talked about this before. I mean, at some point in the future, it would be cool. It would be cool. I mean, we're a long ways away from that, but I've had book
Yeah,
ideas too. My senior thesis for my undergraduate, which was on,
yeah,
yeah, so I'll
on
actually
German
keep,
history.
yeah, it actually was on German history as well. But the point is, I aimed to turn that into a book, and I actually did some work on that, but life got in the way and kind of got distracted and focused on other things. But you never know. You never know. And maybe the channel
Yeah.
will help us in that regard someday. Who knows?
Life always gets annoying.
Yeah. Well, speaking about life getting annoying, it got very annoying for the Germans because I have an issue pronouncing this name, but the Battle of Teutoburg,
Teutoburg, yeah.
Teutoburg. I think we should talk about that for a moment because we've seen this depicted in modern media. I'm thinking about like, Rome 2 Total War, but there's other media, of course, we've seen it depicted in. And this was an interesting battle. If we go off of what was said, I mean, again, asymmetric warfare. The Germans were attacking the very, why am I blanking on my word here? Drawn out, they were overstretched Roman formation that was basically just a thin line going through the forest at this point. And so they were very vulnerable. They couldn't get into defensive formation. And the Germans attacked from multiple different points. They would attack and then retreat and then attack and then retreat. You have stories that, they were painted all in like black paint or mud, war paint. They may have taken psychedelic or hallucinogenic, excuse me, mushrooms and other substances to kind of have like a high before going into battle, kind of like berserkers, like we said from Lord of the Rings, or you could look at other cultures as well and throughout history. Fire was probably used in some degree. This was a very interesting battle that ended in a crushing defeat for the Romans.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually really a big defeat. I mean, like, it may sound as not that much, 3 legions, when you consider, they had over 20 legions, but I mean, most of them were stationed to basically oppress revolutions. So it was not like they could just like whatever bring those troops here and then we do that. Also, if you bring up such a big army, don't what? Sorry, that. Wait a second. Okay, sorry, but there was just my iPad started talking. I don't know why.
I think I'm going to leave that in. No edit.
I mean, it was short, so it's okay. So where did I stop?
We were talking about the 3 legions.
Yeah, exactly. So you couldn't just bring the legions from other places and let them march on Germania for safety reasons and of the whole empire, but also because you need supply lines for such a big army. There was not like nowadays where you had planes, where you have trains, where you have ships and stuff. That was a little more difficult to do, especially the more you move into Germania, the more difficult it became. So that was not as easy as it sounds. So 3 legions defeated is a big thing, and for a big setback also for Rome. And at a certain point, Rome had to ask themselves the question: is the benefit worth the cost?
Yeah.
And it was not. At least for them, it was not.
No. But now there was. They did send a punitive expedition in to kind of push back at the German Confederation. But like we mentioned in an episode, this wasn't for a reconquest or an attempted reconquest or anything like that. This was more to punish Arminius and those of the German Confederation. Like you said, they made a strategic calculation.
Yeah. So, this whole story is Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Unfortunately, lacking a lot of sources.
Yes, but I do want to close on one note, which is for me, what was so interesting is Germany as a united entity really didn't exist until very recent in terms of history. But
Yeah.
this far back, you did see like the beginnings of something like a Germanic identity, a unified identity. Now, I'm not saying this was, who knows what Arminius really envisioned? I mean, I know we talk about there were people who thought he wanted to be the king of like Germania and, consolidate all power of the tribes amongst himself or within himself. And it's like, maybe that's pretty ambitious. That might also be us looking at it retrospectively. But nonetheless, in a lot of ways, this did represent like the first moment that something like that, even in a very vague sense, was coming into being. And that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, you're definitely correct. That's like a lot ahead of time and very, very interesting.
Yeah. Because I mean, it would be centuries before Germany as a, political entity, a united country came into being.
Yeah. So it was definitely ahead of time.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. So I thought it was a really interesting episode. I definitely expect us to do more things like this in the near future. I know we had people talking about if we're going to cover, some of the like the Iceni over in Britannia, or the Gallic people in Gaul. And there's a lot to this time period of history which we will explore in time. Definitely, I can envision us doing that again.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, it would be a pleasure to come back.
Oh yeah, I'm sure we will. I'm sure we will. And I'm definitely sure we will be covering more German history, both old and more recent, in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, anyway, yeah, I enjoyed the episode. If you guys haven't checked it out, see the card at some point in this episode. There'll also be a link down in the description. Feel free to leave some comments, likes, let us know what you thought about the episode or what you what you would like to see covered in the future. And I think that about does it. Okay. Well, on that
So
note,
guys.
oh yeah.
So see you next time.
Yeah. See you guys next time.